Hi, I'm Dr. Aaron Patton, and we're standing here today in plot 1 of the Daniel Turfgrass Research Center, where we have several different zoysiagrass studies going on. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to show you some of these different experiments and tell you some of the work that we're doing with zoysiagrass. Now, I don't know how much experience you have with zoysiagrass, but when I was a kid, I played at a municipal golf course that was mostly cool season turfgrass, but we had a few patches of zoysiagrass like this out on the golf course. And we always thought it was, produced the best golfing turf in summertime, and so we always had a few patches out on the course that we would try to aim for, maybe in the hopes that we could hit our tee shot there and then have a perfect lie for our next shot into the green. So I've been a big fan of zoysiagrass for a long time, just because it produced such a great turf, particularly in the summer months. Now in Indiana, in our climate, this warm season grass is going to go dormant during the winter time, so it's going to turn a brown straw color. And but one of the reasons that I like zoysiagrass now as a turfgrass researcher is because it's a very low input turfgrass. We don't really have to do a lot to manage it. So for example, these plots don't really get fertilized. We don't really do much for weed control. We don't spray fungicides out here. And so some of these plots, like this one, look particularly good. And so this experiment is now about 6 or 7 years old, and it's a combination of multiple things. But with this study, we're doing research with the University of Georgia and North Carolina State University, and we're trying to develop a set of molecular markers that can be used to identify which genes, or to be used to help the breeders identify the genes that confer cold tolerance with zoysiagrass. So one of the challenges for plant breeders who breed zoysiagrass is that the finer textured zoysiagrasses that have really good turf quality are also the ones that have maybe the poorest winter hardiness. Okay, and so we don't want them to winter kill if we plant them, and so we want them to be able to survive the winters like these varieties have over time. And so we're working to develop these molecular markers to basically identify the genes involved in conferring cold tolerance. So as the breeders make these crosses, rather than having to plant them out in the field and wait for a severe winter to test whether they're cold hardy or not, they can, in the laboratory, do a genetic test to figure out, does this variety, does this new cross that I've developed have the genes that would allow it to survive a tough winter in a northern climate like Indiana. So this is just one example of some of the work that we're doing here at Purdue to try to breed a better zoysiagrass for northern states like Indiana. Now in the 1930s, two scientists from the USDA did a collection trip for different plants in Korea. And so it was common in the late 1800s and early 1900s that we would send these, what we call plant explorers, over to Asia to basically collect plants like soybean and citrus and many other plants that we use commonly in the United States today that are not native to North America. And so one of the plants that these early explorers brought back to the United States was zoysiagrass. And so in the 1930s, two scientists went to Korea and they collected some seed from zoysiagrass that they found growing in what today we know as North Korea. And they brought those plants back to Maryland to be assessed at the Arlington Turf Gardens, which are where the current site of the Pentagon is. And so the Arlington Turf Gardens were basically one of the first official turf research gardens in the U.S., and that's where USDA scientists could examine how well these grasses that were brought back to the U.S. perform. And one of the grasses that they found that performed really well was this variety of zoysiagrass with the experimental number 52. And so it was called Z52 zoysiagrass. And later, that Z52 zoysiagrass became Meyer zoysiagrass. And so in 1951, Meyer zoysiagrass was released as a collaboration between the USGA and the USDA. And that's what we're standing on right now, Meyer zoysiagrass. And Meyer, since 1951, has been known as probably the best zoysiagrass for northern climates like Indiana, where we have severe winters. And so we need a zoysia that can both perform well in the summertime, but also survive many of our severe winters. And you see, if we look into this plot right now, it doesn't look the very best. You know, it's okay. We're in the month of June. It's had a little bit of large patch this spring, which is a rhizoctonia disease of zoysiagrass, and so you can tell it's thinned out by this. And granted, we haven't really been maintaining this with very many inputs, very little fertilization, little fungicides and so on, and so we see what it might look like if we didn't try to maintain it. So for many years, Meyer zoysiagrass was really the only zoysiagrass variety that we had available to us in Indiana. Now, about 20 years ago, there became a seeded variety called Zenith that we started using a little bit more, and you could establish it by seed, but it's a slow process, as it's a slow grower, and it's challenging to grow zoysiagrass in by seed because of some of the weed competition. So in addition to Meyer and Zenith, there's now really a third variety that we're recommending for Indiana, and that's called Innovation. So I want to show you what Innovation zoysiagrass looks like. So over here we have a plot of Innovation zoysiagrass. Now this is a variety that was bred in a collaboration between Kansas State University and Texas A&M. So Texas A&M has had a strong zoysiagrass breeding program for many years, back all the way really to the early 80s when they started breeding zoysiagrass plant material that they collected in Asia. And Kansas State is a great collaborator for them from the standpoint of they have really severe winters like we do in Indiana. Their winters are just as cold as ours, but their winters are a little bit drier than ours. And so through many years of collaboration, they developed this variety, which was known as KSUZ0802, or which is now sold as Innovation zoysiagrass. And so we've been growing Innovation in our experimental plots here for many years. And we can see here this plot, which has not been maintained with really fertility or fungicides. It's doing very well in this low maintenance situation and has survived Indiana every year that we've planted it here. Okay? And then also the research out in Kansas shows that Innovation has cold tolerance equal to Meyer. So now we have Meyer and Zenith and also this new variety, Innovation, that's being grown as sod in Indiana. And so I just encourage all of you who use zoysiagrass, whether it be on your golf course or maybe in some lawns, just to consider trying out this new variety on some of the areas that you manage. Okay, we're standing here on the side of an experiment that we're doing in collaboration with Texas A&M and Kansas State University. And what we're doing is we're working with the plant breeder at Texas A&M University to try to make a better zoysiagrass for the Midwest. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, Meyer zoysiagrass has been the industry standard for zoysiagrass in the Midwest for some time. It performs well in the transition zone and has excellent winter survival, but it struggles with a few things. It struggles with susceptibility to a disease called large patch. It struggles with damage from billbugs, and it's kind of a slow grower, so it doesn't always fill in quickly from divots or doesn't always spread quickly on the sod farm. The idea is, can we make a better Meyer zoysiagrass? Can we make something that maybe has a little bit finer texture to it, maybe closer to a creeping bentgrass? Can we make something that maybe tolerates billbugs better or has less large patch? And so what we have here that you're looking at is the progeny that have survived to date in this study. Now in this experiment we started off with around 1,600 zoysiagrasses, and only about 25 or 30% of those lived. And so what you're looking at are the 25 or 30% of those that have lived. Now we're mowing this right now with just a rotary mower, so you notice some scalping on the plots and so on. But what we're trying to do is just basically gauge which of these grasses look the best and which of these grasses are performing the best across our Indiana winters. So we started off, like I said, with about 1,600. We've already gotten rid of 75% of those as not being adapted. And so now what we have to do is go through and basically rate all these as individuals to figure out which one of these have those characteristics that we're looking at: the fine texture, the ability to spread and fill in quickly, which is what a sod farmer is looking for, and maybe what you're looking for to put on the golf course tee box. And we're also just looking to see how they perform across our Indiana winters, and then also in our summers in Indiana, just to see how well they do. So let's go around, and I want to point out just a few individuals just so you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking for in this study. All right, so this first one we're looking at is actually Meyer's Zoysiagrass. And you can see that it's doing okay. It's not very big, and so that's showing us that it's kind of slow to establish. It's got a little scalp damage, but that's okay. You know, we're mowing it with a rotary mower, not mowing it that often right now. And you see it has what we call an intermediate leaf texture, meaning the leaves aren't real wide, but they're also not real narrow. And so what we're trying to do is find plots that maybe look better than this one. So again, this is our Meyer's Zoysiagrass, kind of the industry standard currently in Indiana. Okay, this next plot that we're looking at, this is the Innovation Zoysiagrass. So this is a new variety that's out on the market. It's kind of hard to tell here, but the leaf texture is just a little bit more narrow than Meyer. You can see it's a little bit of a bigger patch, and so this variety generally is thought to spread a little quicker than Meyer, which means in theory a sod producer should be able to grow in a field a little bit quicker, and divots on a golf course should be able to fill in quicker, or should be able to recover more from some damage. And so you see it's a little bit bigger. It's like Meyer, got a little bit of scalping injury, but not doing too bad considering we're just mowing it with a rotary mower at this point. So this is what we're looking for, is things that may be a little bit better than the Meyer. So let's go take a look at a few others. Okay, here's an example of what we're not looking for. You can see this one is very coarse and wide, and so certainly for an application like a golf course fairway, this would not work very well. Now maybe it would work on a rough on a golf course, or maybe in a roadside, but certainly not a high quality turf. Now, when you go to cross and breed Zoysiagrass, it's just kind of like us with our children, right? Sometimes they look like one parent or the other, and so when you go to make a Zoysiagrass that's cold hardy, but also fine textured, usually you'll cross a cold hardy parent, which typically has a wider leaf blade, with a narrow or fine bladed Zoysiagrass that has maybe a better quality. And sometimes it may end up looking more like one parent than the other. So here's an example of a real coarse textured progeny that is very winter hardy and doing just fine in Indiana, but doesn't have that quality that we're looking for in a new and improved variety. All right, here's an experimental entry that's doing quite well. You can see it's spread out a little bit wider. You can see it's nice and thick. It's tolerating the low mowing height pretty well, and you can tell particularly from the edges here that it's got a good color and a finer leaf texture than many of the others that we've been looking at. And so this would be a real promising one that we'd want to maybe move to the next phase. The next phase is going to be to grow these in bigger plots, start managing them just like you would on a golf course, and then to be able to assess, well, how will they perform across additional winters in Indiana under conditions and management much like a golf course fairway. We'll also be able to screen a variety like this for billbug tolerance with Dr. Doug Richmond, so we can see, hey, will it tolerate some of the pests that we have? And then in Kansas, they would take a variety like this and screen it for large patch disease to see if this variety, which has parents that are a little bit more tolerant to large patch, if this progeny also is more tolerant to large patch. So this is just one example of some of the improved varieties that we're trying to develop in this collaboration with Texas A&M and Kansas State. All right, here's another promising experimental entry. You can see it's got good color. It's spread out quite a bit. It's very dense. It's got a finer or leaf texture or narrower leaf blade, and it's good. Now there is some thinning here in the middle, and so that's probably a little bit of winter injury. And so this is an example of how we need to continue to study this variety over multiple years, so we can really get a sense on how well is this going to perform in Indiana over multiple winters. So far it's performed well over 2 winters, but often we need to study these grasses for 5 or 6 years before we can reliably say whether they'll survive our winters in Indiana. But another promising one that we need to continue to explore further in bigger plots and some additional testing. One of the experiments that we do about every 5 years is we host the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program's Zoysiagrass Trial. And so that's what you're looking at here at this site. It's June 29th, 2020. And then we planted this site, I believe in the first week of July in 2019. So it's almost a year old now. And so you can see some varieties are doing quite well. And then you can see others that have completely bit the dust in our Indiana winters. And so what we're trying to do is figure out which zoysia grasses are well adapted to our climate. And then this same test is being conducted at about 20 locations around the country, so we can figure out how do these varieties perform across multiple climates. Now, I want to just kind of point out a couple plots, but not really focus too much on these experimental entries because they're just a year old. And so we really need to evaluate them over multiple years. But the first plot I want to show you is the Meyer zoysia grass. So what we do is we always include varieties like Meyer zoysia grass that are industry standards, so we can compare these older varieties with some of the new experimental entries that we're comparing them to. And you can see that this one, which was established by plugs, so there's been a plug here and a plug here and one here and one here, it's slowly spreading out by those plugs, but the way that we establish these trials, it takes them about 18 months to get fully established. Now here, right next to the Meyer, you can see there's an experimental entry that's looking quite promising. It's maybe filled in just a little bit more than the Meyer. You can see that the texture or the leaf blade is finer or narrower, and the color is looking quite well. And so this grass shows some promise. Now you can see multiple green entries throughout the trial, some fine textured, some a little bit coarser textured. You can see some that have completely winter killed in our climate. So again, we're doing this work to try to figure out which varieties are going to perform best in Indiana across multiple winters, so that in the future we can recommend some of these varieties to you. Now these varieties are coming from zoysia grass breeding programs like the University of Georgia, like the University of Florida, like Texas A&M. Those are all southern universities, and so often they need to test these varieties at our site in order to make sure they're winter hardy. And so that's why you see some dead entries out here, is because they haven't been able to screen their populations for this winter stress that we get up north. And so while they may look quite nice in the warm months, they just can't survive the winter, where other varieties are doing quite well. So again, we're just trying to test these varieties to see how they look over time. Now, any of these zoysia grass variety trials that we've shown you, I'm more than happy to show you anytime you'd like. So if you are considering planting zoysia grass at your site and you'd like to come visit us in West Lafayette, we'd be happy to just show you around to these plots, show you the ones that are commercially available and the ones that might become commercially available in the near future, so you can make planning decisions for your operation. All right, now earlier we looked at a trial that we're working with Texas A&M University and Kansas State University to try to develop a finer textured Meyer. And we've been collaborating with them for many years now. And so this particular trial is a result of one of those collaborations that started around 2011. And so in this trial, we started off with some 5,000 experimental zoysia grass entries, and we planted them in either Kansas or Texas or Indiana. And then from that, we've narrowed it down to the best 10 of those 5,000 zoysia grass progeny. And you can see some really high quality turf here. We see some plots that just looking fantastically green and covered. And so these are some of the new experimental entries that may one day become a cultivar. And when we compare how well these varieties are growing with a plot like this, we can see that clearly those seem to be doing much better. Now this is actually Meyer zoysia grass. That's kind of our industry standard here in Indiana, and you can tell it's really struggling in this particular trial, particularly compared to some of these experimental entries. Now all these in this row are experimental entries, and all the 4 plots here are experimental entries, and then here we have Meyer zoysia grass, and then here we have the innovation zoysia grass that you can now buy as sod here in Indiana. So again, we're working, and we have been working for many years to try to make a better zoysia grass for folks like yourself in Indiana, or anyone trying to grow zoysia grass in the Midwest or the transition zone, and we're making some headway. And so it could be that here in a few years, one of the varieties that we've helped to develop could be a new commercially available cultivar here in the Midwest. Now in the previous studies, we've been looking at trying to maybe find and develop a zoysia grass that looks finer textured or prettier, if you will, more beautiful than the Meyer zoysia grass that we've used as a standard in Indiana for years. But in this study, we're trying to do something a little bit different. We're trying to take advantage of the low input aspects of zoysiagrass, the fact that we don't really need to do much to control weeds, we don't really need to apply a lot of fertilizer, and we don't need to mow that often. And we're trying to figure out, well, how can we take advantage of some of these qualities of zoysiagrass and maybe use it in other markets. Now, if you've driven through Indiana like I have, you've probably noticed some zoysiagrass occasionally on roadsides and other areas that get very little maintenance. And so what we're looking at in this trial, this is a low input trial where we're trying to figure out how would some of these more coarser textured, wider bladed zoysiagrasses do if we put them in an area that didn't get any inputs. And so this trial is now in its third year. And the first year we fertilized it and controlled weeds as needed. But since then, we have only controlled weeds in between the plots, and we don't irrigate this, and we don't fertilize it. And so it basically is on its own, low maintenance, just kind of like a roadside turf is. And so the idea is, could we develop a zoysiagrass that could be used maybe on golf course roughs or low maintenance sites like a roadside. So I want to take you and just kind of walk you and show you what some of these might look like. All right, so we're going to look at 4 zoysiagrasses, and these are actually 4 zoysiagrasses that I've collected from Indiana roadsides that are not Meyer zoysiagrass. I'm not sure what variety they are, but they're much coarser than Meyer zoysiagrass, but they're ones that have performed well for us over the years in our trials, and that I think have some potential to be used in these low maintenance areas. So here's one example. Look how nice and dark green this variety is, how dense it is. It's doing a good job choking out weeds. It's not winter killing, and that shows just by its cover and its density. And so this could make a potentially a great lawn grass, a great golf course rough grass. A lot of potential for a variety like this to be used in areas that we don't typically use zoysiagrass. Now here's a variety that looks much different. You can see the color's not as good. It's kind of a yellow or a lime green color to it. We can see that the density is not quite as dense. We don't have very many weeds, but there's just not quite as good of a density. And this plot is being mown at about 3.5 inches right now. But imagine a grass like this in a roadside or an area that you wanted to grow turf, but you really didn't want to have to do anything to maintain it. This could be a potentially great grass for a site like this, site like that, and just like this next grass. And actually, in fact, I know that both these grasses were collected from roadside areas, so they had already been performing really well on those roadsides, choking out the weeds and not requiring nearly as much mowing as our other traditional roadside grasses might need. So there's potential for these grasses to be used in areas, again, that we haven't commonly or traditionally used them. And then this last variety here is another one that has a little bit better density, a little bit better color. And again, this could be potentially a great grass for a golf course rough. The ball sets up nicely, the golf ball does, in a rough like this, which would help golfers play golf quickly. It's nice and dense, keeps the weeds out, and doesn't grow as fast as some of our other grasses. It would go dormant in the fall, so you wouldn't have to mow it as long during the year. And so there's some potential advantages here. I'm not saying there's not disadvantages to growing zoysiagrass, and maybe you don't want that brown straw color on your turf site in the winter months. But there's many pros and advantages to these grasses that we might consider using them in other areas. So this is kind of a different zoysiagrass study where instead of throwing away the coarser bladed varieties and because maybe they don't have any utility, we're considering other utilities or other possible uses for these grasses.